and welcome to The Agenda. I'm Stephen Cole, and as much of Europe fights a second wave of COVID-19, this week we'll be looking at just where we are in the global hunt for a vaccine. There are a number of candidate vaccines already in phase 3 trials. We'll be speaking to the manufacturer of one of them, Synovac. Plus, we'll ask if political pressure is forcing scientists to cut corners and work too fast. And will one vaccine be enough, or do we need multiple options to rid the world of COVID-19? After cases of COVID-19 across the European continent eased over the summer, there's been a worrying rise in cases in most of its countries, including Spain, France, the UK, Czech Republic, Iceland, and Denmark. And of course, many countries around the world are still fighting a first wave. India, Brazil, and the USA, all still reporting tens of thousands of new cases every day. So, where are we in the search for a vaccine? Well, the honest answer is no one really knows for sure. The good news is that research to find a vaccine for COVID-19 is happening at breakneck speed. According to the World Health Organization, there are currently around 240 possible vaccines for the virus in development across the globe, and 40 have already reached the stage of clinical testing. As of the end of September, just 9 have reached phase 3 trials in China, the United States, Russia, and here at the UK at Oxford University, although a few more have claimed they'll begin that final stage before possible implementation in October. Almost all vaccines work in the same way, introducing an active ingredient, a small, harmless amount of the virus, into a patient to get their immune system to create antibodies to fight off the disease. But certainly in the case of COVID-19, there are many different ways of creating a vaccine-ready virus sample, from genetic engineering to an entirely synthetic approach. The World Health Organization says the world can't return to anything like normality, even the so-called new normality, until an effective vaccine for the virus has been found. And with that second wave taking hold across much of the UK and Europe, the pressure is mounting on the world's chemists and scientists. Well, let's speak now to one of the companies behind one of the potential vaccines already in phase 3 trials. Joining me now from Tunchong in Yunnan province is Helen Yang, and Helen is Senior Director of Global Strategy and Business Development at Sinovac. Helen, how exactly does your vaccine work?
Sure. Actually, Synovac is developing an inactivated COVID-19 vaccine by inactivating the live viruses. So basically, we kill the live part of the virus, but we keep the shell of the protein of the virus, and then inject into the human body to induce the antibody against the viruses, but people will not get infected after receive the vaccination.
And how does your vaccine differ from the vaccines being developed around the world?
Right. I think for basically the roadmap are different. Different from the process are different. We're using live virus and doing inactivation, purification, and then adding the aluminum hydroxide as an adjuvant. It is a mature technology that has been used in many different types of vaccines, and millions of these kind of vaccines being used on humans in the past. So it is a reliable technology. But others, as far as I understand, there are mRNA and vector-based vaccines or new technology. And as far as we saw from the published literature, that the in terms of safety profile, inactivated vaccine shows a better safety profile as far as we learned. And we have the side effect reported less than 20%. And also we don't have a grade 3 adverse reaction. And we don't have high fever after using the vaccine in the trial, phase 1 and phase 2. There's another difference which is regarding to the transportation. The inactivated vaccine can be transported under 2 to 8 degrees Celsius. I learned that some other vaccines needs to be stored and transported like -20 or even -70 or 80 degrees Celsius.
Well, that was going to be a big hurdle, wasn't it, transporting it in freezing conditions? You're at stage 3 of the trial, so who are you testing it on and where are you testing it?
Sure. We are currently testing the vaccine phase 3 in Brazil, in Turkey, and also a smaller trial in Indonesia. And in Brazil, we're testing above 9,000 volunteers for healthcare workers. But in Turkey, we will start with healthcare workers at a phase 1, and then we'll move into the general population, which we expect to enroll 13,000 volunteers. And in Indonesia, it is also a general population, but it's a smaller size trial, so 1,600 volunteers.
Have you encountered any problems with those tests and trials?
I think currently the trials are undergoing very well. Like in Brazil, we have already a few thousand volunteers being inoculated either with a vaccine or placebo, because now it is still blind. We don't know who gets what. But purely from the observation of people who get the vaccine, we didn't see any vaccine-related severe adverse reactions. So we think in terms of the safety observation, so far so good. But we still need to wait until the trial is completed and to do the unblinding to have a further analysis on the results.
Why did you choose those countries to trial the vaccine?
Right. Firstly, because for new vaccine development, phase 3 trial, which is to test the efficacy and also the safety in a large population, is the last stage of the research. But as you may know, that in China, we have been locked down for months, so the reported cases is very limited. And however, when we trying to test the vaccine for efficacy, we need to have a certain level of incident rate. So that's why we're not able to do it in China. And then we start to seeking a international partnership. And thank for Brazil partners and also the local a strong FDA body. And they reviewed our case and approved us to conduct a trial there. As well as in Turkey, we recently kicked off the phase 3 trial in Turkey in September as well. And there are other places we're applying, like we also recently obtained approval from Chile, that my colleague is there and trying to work with the local university to kick off another phase 3 trial in Chile.
And what would you say is or has been the biggest challenge so far in getting that vaccine?
Yeah, I think actually along the way of this development, we have facing many different type of challenges from different stages. I think the most challenging one in the past would be where we can do the phase 3 trial, but now that was concluded and we're carrying on the phase 3 trial. So for the next step, which is also the ultimate objective for us to develop a vaccine, which is to deploy the vaccine and use it to control the disease. However, everyone knows that the virus travels across the border. It doesn't need to have any license. It can go anywhere. But for vaccine, if you need to use in different territories, you have to get the local license. So also we would like to encourage a true international partnership on recognizing the regulatory approval, or there are some collaborations on regulatory affairs among different countries. And I think that would be a speed up the process, and it will be benefiting on providing a early access of vaccines in different countries.
You mentioned you're trialing in Brazil, Indonesia, Turkey, but are you cooperating with other institutes, other scientists around the world?
As we are keep developing the vaccine, we also receive a lot of requests for partnership, and we are in discussion with many different countries, no matter from the research purposes or for the supply of the vaccine purposes. And we believe that only a global partnership can make the things happen, can help to use the vaccine to stop the disease. And we think that's instrumental to really make the change of the current situation.
If you can offer me your opinion of when you think that vaccine might be ready.
Well, for our case in Brazil, I think it is the phase 3 trial that we started. The first trial we started, I think we are, that's a case-driven trial. we need to, after we inoculate the volunteers, we need to collect the confirmed cases. And based on the scientific study, there should be a certain number of cases needs to be collected before we reach an interim report or interim status that we can unblind the trial. Therefore, there are uncertainties about timing. But if everything moves smoothly, we may expect to having some data around end of November or even December. But it's still having some uncertainties around that. We need to keep a close look on that.
And how many doses do you think Sinovac is capable of producing?
We have already complete construction of our production plant dedicated to COVID-19 vaccine. The current expected annual capacity is about 300 million doses. And we will keep optimizing the process using this new facility. And we may have a chance to produce higher than that amount. But this is also beginning of the commercial production. Therefore, that we are also looking forward to see how the production process is running.
Senior Director Helen Yang, thanks for joining us on The Agenda.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, the discovery of an effective vaccine is just the beginning of a process which could lead to the end of the pandemic. As my next guest puts it, a vaccine isn't just magic dust that will be sprinkled over the world to make this all go away. So let's speak now to Dr. Paul Offit. Paul is head of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Paul, what's your take on the way the search for a COVID vaccine is being conducted?
I think it's been remarkable. I mean, we really just had this virus, SARS-CoV-2, in hand in January. It's been less than a year. You have more than 180 research projects moving forward on this vaccine. You have more than 100 companies across the globe interested in making it. You have billions of dollars serving as a pull mechanism to make it. I think in all likelihood, we will have a vaccine by early next year, which will be the fastest vaccine ever made in history. And I think that it will be safe and effective. But I think we'll soon know when we get the completion of these so-called phase 3 trials, these large tens of thousands of persons big, placebo-controlled, prospective controlled studies, and we'll soon know whether we have a vaccine or not.
Well, as you say, there are a number of phase 3 trials going on, ranging from AstraZeneca in the UK and Johnson & Johnson in the US, but they've had to pause, haven't they, after some adverse effects. Is that a concern, or is that part and parcel of tests of this size?
Right, it's not uncommon. I think because there's so much focus now on these vaccines, any blip is met, with terror, and I think that's what's happened here. They are sort of clinical pauses; they aren't regulatory pauses for the most part, and so whenever there's any possible untoward event. Remember, you're looking at a lot of adults, some of whom are older adults. These people can have health problems, and if a health problem occurs within a certain period of time of getting the vaccine, the question is, could the vaccine have done it? Let's stop, wait, take a close look at this patient, take a look at other people who may have gotten this vaccine, who may have had a similar story, and then we can feel more comfortable about moving forward. So I think these sort of clinical pauses occur. You just never really hear about them as we move forward.
And you say, as we move forward, we're moving forward at breakneck speed, aren't we, Paul? I mean, you are the co-inventor of a rotavirus vaccine. Briefly tell us in a sentence what that is, but how long did that process take you?
Right, so rotaviruses are a virus that infects the intestinal tract and so causes fever, vomiting, diarrhea, and severe dehydration. This is a virus that killed about 2,000 people a day in the world before we had a vaccine. How long did it take us? It took us about 26 years.
Oh, only 26 years. And now you're talking about getting a COVID vaccine in a year.
Right, there weren't 100 companies trying to make a rotavirus vaccine. There weren't the Health and Human Services, the World Health Organization, and Gates Foundation weren't spending billions of dollars to move this vaccine along. So it went through the normal process of going phase 1, then phase 2, then phase 3, then mass production. Here, those are sort of conflated. The governments have said, look, we'll take the risk out of it for pharmaceutical companies. We'll pay for the phase 3 trials, even though they cost hundreds of millions of dollars. We'll pay for mass production, even though we don't know yet whether this vaccine works works, and we don't know yet whether it's safe. We're willing to throw away tens of millions of doses if the phase 3 trial shows that it doesn't work. No pharmaceutical company would ever do that. That's why this is so much faster.
You sit on the US Food and Drug Administration Advisory Committee. What role might you have in deciding which of these vaccines to take up?
Right, so the way the FDA's Vaccine Advisory Committee works is we're presented with data. In this case, it'll be phase 3 data for each of these vaccines, and then we'll decide whether the data are robust enough to say with confidence that it's safe, which is to say that it doesn't have a relatively uncommon severe side effect problem, and whether it's effective and how effective it is, and whether we can say that the data are statistically significant and robust enough to, with confidence, say, okay, here's what we know. I mean, each step of the way, you're just trying to mitigate risk. You're trying to lessen uncertainty. When you do a phase 3 trial, that doesn't eliminate uncertainty. It doesn't completely eliminate risk. It just tells you that at this point, you think that the data are secure enough that the benefits of the vaccine outweigh its theoretical risks. And that's when you launch a product. And then you make sure you look after the vaccine is already out there to make sure it doesn't have a rare side effect problem, to make sure that the efficacy or effectiveness of the vaccine lasts not just 6 months, which is probably all we'll know, but it lasts a year, 2 years, 3 years. We'll only know that after these vaccines are out there.
But even if we achieve a vaccine, we're still going to be having to be very careful about hygiene measures, aren't we?
Very much so. That's what scares me the most, actually. I mean, suppose you have a vaccine that's 75% effective at preventing moderate to severe disease, which I think we'd all be happy with. That still means 1 out of every 4 people who get that vaccine could still get sick from this virus, which means, and because you don't know who that's going to be, we all should really still wear masks and still try to do social distancing until this virus is under control, until we stop spread. When that happens, then I think we can start to breathe a sigh of relief. But until that happens, we need both things. We need both a vaccine and we need these hygienic measures to be in place.
So what you're saying, in effect, is even if we get a vaccine next year, we're still going to have to be very careful about our personal hygiene and perhaps social distancing for at least another year after that.
Yeah, or whatever length of time it takes before we can say that the so-called contagiousness index, the so-called R0, drops to less than 1. We now know that the virus isn't spreading in any important way. Once that happens, then I think we can start to loosen those hygienic measures.
Okay. And lastly, is one vaccine enough, especially with a virus that's likely to mutate?
Yeah, I mean, well, this is a so-called single-stranded RNA virus. So it mutates, like all single-stranded RNA viruses, it mutates. The question is, does it mutate in a functionally important way? And I think what you're asking it was, will it mutate in a manner the way that influenza mutates, that you would need a yearly vaccine because the virus is always mutating away from the vaccine? To date, that doesn't appear to be true. This virus is more like the other single-stranded RNA viruses like measles or mumps or German measles, which although they mutate, don't mutate away from the vaccine. I think that's going to be the story with this virus. So hopefully we won't need a yearly vaccine.
Dr. Paul Offit, many thanks to you for joining us on The Agenda.
Thank you.
Still to come here on The Agenda, just how can we ensure everyone will get their dose of any successful vaccine? Search CGTN Europe wherever you get your podcasts to subscribe to The Agenda podcast. The Agenda with me, Stephen Cole, always gets to the heart of the story. Just subscribe today and listen now. Welcome back to The Agenda. 6 months ago, here on The Agenda, we spoke to Dr. Jerome Kim. And Dr. Kim is Director General of the International Vaccines Institute. And he told me then of the unprecedented speed and the level of global cooperation behind the search for a COVID vaccine. And I'm delighted to say he can now join us again from Seoul. Dr. Kim, when we spoke back in May, you were pretty optimistic about the speed at which scientists had come together to work towards a vaccine. Are you still feeling as positive?
I'm still cautiously optimistic. In 10 months' time, we've moved 8 or 9, depending on how you count them, vaccines forward into phase 3, the final stage of testing for safety and effectiveness. And that's really a remarkable task given the fact that we knew absolutely nothing about this virus in December of 2019. So we have made a lot of progress. We're still waiting to see the results, and our fingers are crossed.
We've heard a lot about the ethics of the breakneck speed with which scientists are rushing to find the vaccine. Do you have any reservations about the speed with which we're rushing into this?
So I think the speed is appropriate. And the reason I think it's appropriate is that those countries and companies that are following what we call good clinical practices, which is an international standard for scientific integrity and ethical conduct of trials, as long as they're following that, then we should have a way forward that includes the kinds of safeguards that we normally associate with the vaccines that are used in the UK or in Europe or in North America. We will still use the same targets for the efficacy, for whether the vaccine is working to protect against disease or infection. We will still have at least 2 months, if you look at the US FDA guidance, of safety data on vaccines before even an emergency use authorization is considered. So, the bulk of safety events occur within the first 2 months. So again, the US FDA is being conservative and in trying to evaluate these vaccines as best they can, given the fact that to balance against the speed with which we're going, the incredible human tragedy that's been wrought by this pandemic, with millions of people infected and 1 million people or more now who've succumbed to the virus, we really have to move forward with a vaccine solution, given the fact that so many countries are now in the second wave of what seems to be a major new set of infections and hospitalizations.
But the worry, the concern is, in some countries, the decision to go ahead with that vaccine may be political more than medical, because there is a race to be first past the post. And in that race, when do you think we will see the first vaccine past that post?
So I still think that the target of seeing evidence of safety and efficacy by the end of this year or early next year is a reasonable one, actually not for one, but maybe for several of the vaccine candidates. I think that the idea that this is a race is not correct, because is the prize going to go to the first company that generates evidence of safety and efficacy, or is it really going to go to that group that will be able to deploy hundreds of millions of doses of a safe and effective vaccine at a reasonable cost and really begin to impact the epidemic? And I think it's going to be, we're going to have to manufacture high quality vaccine at a reasonable price, and we're going to have to get it out there. We're going to have to take it the last mile and inject it into the arms of people who need it.
And how difficult is that distribution process going to be, do you think?
Yeah, I think the head of WHO was right when he said, the vaccine itself is not the silver bullet. There's a huge amount of work that will need to go into distributing this vaccine to 8 billion people, which will mean that the vaccine needs to be transported under appropriate conditions, and most vaccines need to be refrigerated, so somewhere between 2 and 8 degrees centigrade, and then have to be injected. And we're talking not only about injecting children, which we're actually pretty good at worldwide these days. We're talking about injecting adults and teenagers. And how are we going to get these populations together safely and vaccinate them? And how are we going to collect information about whether the vaccine is having any adverse events as we go from tens of thousands of people in the clinical trials?
Well, I'm hoping that you will answer all those questions.
I hope to be a part of the solution. I think everyone who works on vaccines views COVID-19 as a particular challenge. We've been asked to develop a vaccine technology in really an amazingly short period of time. And the companies and countries and organizations have banded together and really done a remarkable job at trying to get out a vaccine that meets the standards for safety and efficacy that we would apply to other vaccines. And you know, the fact that, you know, companies and countries are working as quickly as they can will make it look like a race. And maybe we'll have more than one vaccine at the end of the day.
Well, that's what that was my question, actually, Dr. Kim. I wonder if we will need more than one vaccine.
So one vaccine would be great. You know, if there were more than one vaccine that were proven to be safe and effective, then we'd have a problem that would also be good to have, which is how do we use these different vaccines? How are they different? Actually, you know, when you think about it, proving that the vaccine works is one thing. But what do you do the day after efficacy is shown? So when you wake up the next morning after the announcement, are you going to say, I'm going to just go out and get my jab and that'll be done with it? No, actually, there are a huge number of questions. How are we going to make it? In quantity, with high quality? How are we going to distribute it and give it to 8 billion people? But then there are a whole series of scientific questions. You know, we did move quickly through vaccine development, so we didn't necessarily have time to optimize the dose or the schedule. You know, maybe it's not good to give vaccines, or maybe it's better to give a vaccine at month 0 and month 6, rather than month 0 and month 1. You know, we had to do some things, and so there is going to be some optimization. There are new vaccines, I mean, a second generation or a third generation of vaccines that are behind this first generation, and maybe those will be better. We don't know. But how will we test them? There are other questions around, you know, whether we can develop understanding of how the vaccines actually protect, what we call a correlative protection, because that will make it much quicker and cheaper to evaluate new vaccine candidates. And then finally, you know, these questions around licensure or emergency use authorization, as you point out, you know, they shouldn't be political. They should be scientific and medical. And most countries have, or organizations like the EMA have a set of rules that they follow. And these rules look at safety and efficacy. So as much as possible, in order to assure people that the vaccines that we're going to be giving on a worldwide basis are safe and effective, we have to use science and not politics as the measure.
So still, yet more questions to be answered, but maybe those are for next time. But for this time, Dr. Kim, thank you very much indeed for joining us on The Agenda.
My pleasure. Thank you.
More than 1 million people have now died from COVID-19 around the world. In the words of the UN Secretary General, a mind-numbing figure and an agonizing milestone. That's why the world's scientists are working at breakneck speed to try and find a cure, the vaccine. But on the day that a COVID-19 vaccine is approved, a vast logistics operation will be needed. Millions of doses must travel hundreds of miles from manufacturers to hospitals, doctors' offices and pharmacies, which in turn must store, track and eventually get the vaccines to people right around the world. And everyone involved seems to agree that the COVID situation is significantly different and more complex than anything they've had to deal with in the past. And that includes transporting the vaccine at freezing temperatures. The freezer temperature required makes it difficult to ship, nearly impossible to maintain outside of a large hospital with specialized freezers. In the short term, speed is of the essence. But in the long run, safety, effectiveness and ease of use will determine which vaccines get widely distributed. If current forecasts are correct, a COVID-19 vaccine will be available in 2021, smashing all records for vaccine development, and there will be many more reasons to trust it than not to. Still, those with their eye on that glittering prize should remember what's at stake. The vaccine developers have to be really careful because what they do with COVID-19 could have repercussions for trust in all future vaccine programs. Coming up on a future agenda, when information is only ever a click away, what does it mean for the future of news? But don't forget, for more agenda content, you can visit our website or you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. But for now, from me, Stephen Cole, and all the Agenda team here in London, it's goodbye.